Order. We come to questions. Secretary of State for Wales. I call Dr James Davies.
Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Wales is receiving £46 million under the UK Community Renewal Fund, 23% of the funding total. 165 projects are being funded across Wales, including 14 in Denbighshire, worth almost £3 million.
Dr James Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for that answer. As he says, in Denbighshire 2 weeks ago, £2.9 million was announced from the Community Renewal Fund for 14 projects, including Blossom and Bloom, a charity in Rhyl that can now support 20 more mothers and babies. Of course, the Community Renewal Fund is there to help communities prepare for the introduction of the Shared Prosperity Fund. Will my right honourable friend outline what discussions he's having about that fund and whether there will be capital as well as revenue availability through it?
My honourable friend raises a very good question. I hope he will take into account that we're looking at the Levelling Up Fund, the Community Renewal Fund, the Community Ownership Fund, as well as the Shared Prosperity Fund in the round, and other funding, potential funding proposals too. And I hope when he sees the detail of that, he will see we address both the capital and revenue issues that he raises.
Owen Thompson.
Number 2.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I will answer questions 2 and 4 together. Wales is benefiting greatly from local growth funding, receiving above its population share for all 3 funds, 7% in the first round of Levelling Up, 9% in the first round of Community Ownership, and a remarkable 23% of the UK Community Renewal Fund.
Owen Thompson.
Mr. Speaker, the principle behind the fund, in theory, is fine, but the prioritisation of Tory-led seats in both Scotland and Wales reveals them to be just another example of pork barrel politics. Correct. So instead of meddling in devolved areas, will the Minister accept that it would be beneficial to the people of the devolved nations to have greater control of decision-making to do things for themselves, devolve more instead of fiddling in devolved areas?
Correct. Well, Mr. Speaker, I hope he will be able to endorse what I'm about to tell him, because, of course, that's exactly what these funds do. We are going to local authorities. For the first time, 22 local authorities in Wales and other stakeholders are having a say in devolution. You know, Welsh Government doesn't have a monopoly of wisdom any more than UK Government does, but we're taking devolution to its dictionary sort of definition. And I should also point out to him, and I know he'll probably know this, under the UK Renewal Fund, Labour got 44% of the funding, Plaid 24%, Independent 17%, and Conservatives 4th at 15%.
Tommy Shepherd.
Mr. Speaker, let us be clear. Independent estimates tell us that over the next 5 years, the difference between what the devolved administrations would have got through structural funds and what they will get through the Shared Prosperity Fund is £4 billion. So will the Minister stop promulgating this myth, this deception, that there is going to be no difference as a result of leaving the EU, and admit that this is just another Brexit broken promise?
It's a Brexit broken record, I think, Mr. Speaker, to be honest with you. And if I simply told him that the settlement for Wales had gone from £15.9 billion to £18 billion, plus £120 million from the Levelling Up Fund, plus £47 million from the Community Renewal Fund, plus the Community Ownership Fund, plus over £300 million worth of EU tail-off funds, plus £337 million worth of bag funding, it is impossible to come to any other conclusion that this has been a fantastic settlement for Wales.
Atherton.
Mr. Speaker, Wrexham was fortunate to win 1 out of the 2 Levelling Up Fund bids it submitted. Wrexham Council's committed to redefining that bid and working with officials. So can the Minister let me know and let the Council know when the Levelling Up Fund bid round 2 will be open?
I hope I can, Mr. Speaker, and that will be in the early part of next year. And of course, any local authority who wasn't successful in the first round will have a chance to discuss that with officials to see how we can nuance their applications in another year to achieve success.
Nick Williams.
Speaker, Montgomeryshire has not seen the level of investment like this for decades. Can I welcome the Secretary of State's Levelling Up Fund, CRF Fund, The list goes on, but Mid Wales has never seen this kind of investment. And can I implore him to carry on with this proper devolution of working with local councils and asking local people their priorities and get more investment into Mid Wales?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for my honourable friend's intervention. He's absolutely right that every single area of Wales has benefited from these schemes, and that was not the case under the previous funding arrangements. And I think it's been a joy, to be honest with you, to have the kind of feedback and contribution we have from local authorities across Wales who are really welcoming and getting engaged with this process.
Shadow Secretary of State in the UK.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, you would never guess, would you, Mr. Speaker, that the allocation of funding can be quite controversial. But with meaningful consultation, you can reduce that risk. So that, for example, just supposing 2/3 of the Levelling Up Fund were allocated to the 1/3 of seats held by Tory MPs in Wales, then there'd be less risk of it being called political bias. So, in the light of the Institute for Government's recommendation that the UK Government should consult with the Welsh Government at every stage on the Shared Prosperity Fund, and bearing in mind the scathing report by the Public Accounts Committee on the allocation of the Towns Fund, what in-depth discussions has the Secretary of State had with the Welsh Government on the Shared Prosperity Fund, and when can we expect more information?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Honourable Lady fixates a bit too much, I think, on the Shared Prosperity Fund when there are so many other funding sources out there too. But I would remind her, apart from stressing that there is consultation on a range of these things, and I'm hoping to meet the First Minister later on this week to discuss these things, Welsh Government is not the only game in town. We are engaging with more people in more parts of Wales than has ever been the case before. And the funding settlements reflect their priorities as much as anything else. And I think I'm astonished she's not welcoming this.
Peter Griffith.
I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, you will be well aware that the Welsh Government has always had a very strong relationship with the local government sector in Wales and has always consulted on the sharing out of EU funds. But turning to the actual amount of those funds, the figures are indisputable. EU funding for Wales would have meant at least 375 million in new money for this year. So with just 46 million for the Community Renewal Fund, the Tories are leaving Wales 330 million worse off. And that's not even counting the 137 million cut in the farm support. So will the Secretary of State now stand up for Wales and pledge that in this transition to the Shared Prosperity Fund, Wales will receive not a penny less than we had under EU funding?
Speaker, I think you'd probably reprimand me if I went through all the numbers again, so I'll have to leave it to the official record for the Honourable Lady to check her figures and work out exactly how well Wales has done with the record settlement. And I think it is beholden on the Shadow Secretary of Wales to actually portray a rather more optimistic picture of the future of Wales. If we're interested in attracting investment and creating jobs in Wales, she should be championing our country, not denigrating it at every opportunity she has.
Cairns.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the UK Government is fully focused on levelling up the whole of the United Kingdom through programmes such as the Levelling Up Fund. We're working closely and directly with local authorities and other local partners right across the UK to ensure that these are delivered quickly and successfully.
Alun Cairns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Minister aware that Barry in my constituency and the whole of the Vale of Glamorgan didn't qualify for European funds? So therefore, does he accept that the Levelling Up Fund is a potential game changer for the Vale of Glamorgan? And can I draw his attention to the excellent proposal for a marina for Barry, which will also recover some land available for appropriate development? And can I ask him to pay particular attention when this application comes in?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend has long been a doughty champion of this particular scheme, as he has of many other schemes, including the 7 UK Community Renewal Fund projects, which are going to be delivered in the Vale of Glamorgan, worth over £1 million. I would simply say to my right honourable friend that we would encourage as many good quality bids as possible from the Vale of Glamorgan and other local authorities in Wales.
Thank you. On climate action, the UK must step up to provide the funding that's needed across the whole of Wales. But despite that lack of funding that we would have seen from the EU, the Welsh Labour Government are already delivering on renewable energy, on sustainable transport and achieving the 3rd best recycling rates in the world. So can the Secretary of State tell us what discussions he is having with the Welsh Government counterparts to discuss more investment on climate.
I'm absolutely delighted to answer that, Mr. Speaker, because in addition to all of the many programmes which my right honourable friend has mentioned, the UK Community Renewal Fund, the Shared Prosperity Fund, the Levelling Up Funds, of course, there are also the growth deals, which are delivering the very kinds of environmental projects which the Honourable Lady has just referred to. And of course, the growth deals are funded 50% by the UK Government and 50% by the Welsh Government, which will be receiving an extra £2.5 billion as a result of the most generous settlement it's ever had next year.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is tremendous enthusiasm for the Levelling Up Fund in both Denbighshire and Conway, where the local authorities are champing at the bit to put in their bids. So can my honourable friend please indicate when the second round is likely to open?
I can indeed, Mr. Speaker. It will be in the spring of next year, and we look forward to receiving bids from the honourable gentleman, the right honourable gentleman's local authority and local authorities across the rest of Wales.
Davies.
Question number 5, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, last month my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Wales and the First Minister of Wales co-chaired the Coal Tip Safety Summit to receive an update from the Joint Task Force. They have been coordinating work to identify and categorise tips in Wales, and they have undertaken inspections of all the highest risk tips, providing reassurance to those communities who live nearby.
Davies.
My honourable friend and constituency neighbour, the member for the Rhondda, asked the Prime Minister for support for coal tip repairs across our local authority just a few weeks ago. In response, the Prime Minister said, "This is something I do want to try to fix," and he promised to talk to the Welsh Government. So can I ask the Minister for an update on those conversations? Is the plan of support being in place, or is this just more empty words?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not yet responsible for the Prime Minister's diary, but I know that he does welcome engagement with the First Minister at every opportunity. What I would say with respect to the Honourable Lady is that coal tip safety is a devolved issue, and we know that the Welsh Labour Government don't seem to welcome involvement in devolved issues. But we have, of course, provided the Welsh Government with £2.5 billion of extra funding. They have the powers to deal with this, they have the money to deal with it, and we would urge them to get on and deal with it.
You can't do points forward, they come after. Liz Roberts.
Wales's dangerous coal tips loom over our industrial communities like spectres from our industrial past. They remind us how our natural resources were exploited, mostly for the benefit of others. But climate change is set to compound the risk they pose, and we expect rainfall to increase by around 6% over the next 30 years. Now, the COP26 President said this month that it is vital that we help at-risk communities to adapt to the impact of climate change, I quote. How is his refusal to settle this £600 million bill consistent with this statement?
Mr. Speaker, within the £2.5 billion of extra funding that was given to the Welsh Government this year, or will be given to the Welsh Government, was an allocation of money which was there precisely to deal with the sort of problems which the Honourable Lady has referred to. The Honourable Lady has said on many occasions that the UK Government should not get involved in devolved issues. This is a devolved issue, but we have provided the money in order for the Welsh Government to deal with it. If there are dangerous coal tips there, they have the money, they must get on and solve the problem.
Roberts.
Well, gentleman well knows this is an inherited issue, and our industrial communities still bear the scars of the scorched earth policy inflicted by Prime Minister Thatcher. The green transition must be different. The Crown Estate revealed last week that they're planning to build new wind farms off the coast of Wales. Those profits will disappear into Treasury coffers rather than going to the people and businesses of Wales. Will he support my bill and ensure that all Crown Estate profits made in Wales are invested in Wales instead?
Mr. Speaker, in one breath, the Honourable Lady criticises Margaret Thatcher for closing down coal mines. In the next breath, she's saying that we mustn't have coal mines because they're bad for climate change. She'll forgive me if I feel that there's a certain inconsistency there, but I will look with interest at whatever bill she's bringing forward.
John Lambert.
Please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the UK Government is committed to supporting electric vehicle usage in Wales, as well as, of course, across the rest of the UK, which is why the UK Government has introduced a ban on the sale of all new petrol and diesel cars from 2030, as well as introducing the on-street residential charge point scheme.
welcome the rapid change to electric vehicles, but I'm sure the Minister will agree with me that we must not let rural areas fall behind. This is an issue of Wales, but it's an issue that affects all parts of these islands, including in my own constituency in the Scottish border. So what is the Government doing to support more rapid chargers in our rural areas to encourage more people to make the switch to electric vehicles?
Excellent.
Mr Speaker, as the honourable gentleman will be aware, the UK Government has recently granted £187,000 from the UK Community Renewal Fund to help with the project in his own constituency to provide electric vehicle charging points across the Scottish borders. The UK Government will continue to support the implementation of electric charge points through various schemes, including £2.5 billion, which has been committed to plug-in vehicle grants and charging infrastructure programmes.
Number 7, please, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, the Government has provided £2 billion to help businesses with electricity costs and to protect jobs in recent years. We have also various schemes in place to support businesses, including those in Wales with high energy use, to cut their bills and reduce their carbon emissions, including the £315 million Industrial Energy Transformation Fund.
Mr Speaker, 70% of SMEs believe that high energy costs will negatively affect the growth of their companies. We know that businesses are already going to be hammered by this Tory government's national insurance hike. So what are the Secretary of State for Wales and his ministerial colleagues doing to help support Welsh and other UK businesses to help them overcome their energy cost problems, to provide much needed stability, to help them plan ahead and to deliver the growth our economy so badly needs?
Mr Speaker, I'm sorry we can't persuade members of the Labour Party to support a small increase in taxes in order to protect the National Health Service, but that's a matter that we could come back to. What the UK Government does recognise is that as we transition from energy sources such as coal or gas, there will be a challenge in terms of costs. We recognise that, and that's why we've committed to minimising energy costs for businesses through, for example, the £470 million which has been given in relief to energy-intensive industries through a combination of compensation and exemption.
Will he ensure that the efforts the government's rightly making to decarbonise electricity generation does not unfairly disadvantage high-energy industries? Because if it does, we'll be exporting carbon emissions, not reducing them.
The Honourable Lady is exactly right. The Government recognises that potential issue, which is why there has been, for example, £470 million provided to high-energy users through a combination of compensation and exemption. It's a very real problem that the Right Honourable Lady refers to, and one that is recognised and being dealt with by the Government.
We now come to Shadow Minister Gerald Jones.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. High energy costs act as a disincentive for investment from international steel and other manufacturing companies and other investors, with the UK seen as less favourable investment environment than other countries. Other countries with less dramatic price rises have put in prompt measures to proactively support their industries. So why is this government so slow to act? Can the Minister outline what discussions he is having with colleagues across government to follow similar interventions to support the steel and manufacturing industries in Wales?
Mr Speaker, my right honourable friend and I have had and will continue to have a range of discussions with colleagues in other ministerial departments as to how we resolve this problem, but he will surely recognise that we are making a transition, a revolutionary transition, from high carbon emitting sources such as coal and gas towards renewable energy such as wind or solar and possibly nuclear, and that they do come with costs. These are more expensive. Now, I believe that members on all sides of the Houses in this House, Mr Speaker, recognise the need to make that transition. The Government is leading that transition, and we are also putting in place schemes to support those who may face challenges as a result.
So Luke Evans.
Number 8, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My honourable friend Parliamentary Under Secretary and I have regular discussion with ministerial colleagues about cross-border connectivity, including the A5, which is a vital artery connecting North Wales to the West Midlands.
Luke Evans.
Grateful for his answer, and the A5 is a really important road joining Wales to England. There are pinch points all the way along, none more so than the most bashed bridge in Britain right in Hinckley in my constituency. RIS3 is going to be really important for joining up to Wales and England. So what conversations has he had with the Department of Transport for decision point 1 in March when it comes to deciding RIS3?
I'm grateful for the question. I used to drive that road regularly when I was working in North Wales years ago. I met the Transport Secretary this week. Cross-border connectivity and this particular road came up in the conversation, and we are very conscious of the economic impact of making sure that these things are looked at in a holistic cross-border way. And of course, it has not helped that Welsh Government has decided to introduce a moratorium on road improvements in Wales. That slowed the whole business of economic recovery quite considerably.
Chris Elmore.
Number 9, sir.
Question 9. Mr. Speaker, it will be worth waiting for, I promise you. With your permission, I will answer questions 9 and 11 together. I'm hoping to meet the First Minister with the Secretary of State for Levelling Up in Cardiff later this week to discuss how we can best support jobs and economic growth in Wales, including through the various initiatives announced at the autumn budget.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. Obviously, the Secretary of State is with us and awake. It's always nice to see. On the Shared Prosperity Fund, rather than levelling up, because you didn't actually answer my question, Mr. Speaker, we've seen months and years of dither and delay. We've seen questions in the Chamber from the member for Wrexham and Clwyd yesterday about when the Shared Prosperity Fund will be delivered and when we will have dates for local authorities in order to plan. So can the Secretary of State simply set out when the Shared Prosperity Fund will be confirmed, when the dates for bidding will take place, and when will local government get the information it needs in order to bid for this long overdue funding?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to say, my conversations with 22 local authorities, they take a much more benign approach to the funding streams than the honourable gentleman does, and he obsesses with the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. We've been very clear about when that is coming through. Further announcements this year, and of course into next. But he deliberately ignores the Levelling Up Fund, the Community Renewal Fund, the Community Ownership Fund, and all of those other funds which have been such a success in Wales. And I say to him what I said to the Honourable Lady earlier. It would be a whole lot better for future investors and job creation if he spent a little bit more time championing Wales and a little bit less time criticising it.
Well, the Secretary of State dodged that question just as he dodged question number 1. He knows there's a real dearth of information when it comes to the government's Shared Prosperity Fund, which needy communities across Wales desperately need. These same communities, they drove real change with European social funds, probably a better level up fund than the government could ever deliver. So this is a second chance. When are we going to get the detail? When are we going to get the dates so we can get on with planning in Wales and across the rest of the country to spend the Shared Prosperity Fund?
I repeated the answer to this on countless occasions this morning, and we're looking at a whole range of funding provision in Wales. This has been a record settlement. The Chancellor was able to deliver a record settlement. This is the best settlement for Welsh Government as well as local authorities for 20 plus years, and he should be acknowledging that. As far as the timescale is concerned, we have actually stuck to the timescales which we set out in numerous occasions in Welsh and other questions here today. So I can only say to him, and he really does need to change the record. We are now witnessing record sums of money going into parts of Wales which has never even qualified it before, and I have to say to him that is something we should be championing rather than denigrating.
Simon Baines.
Question number 10, please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, Wales will benefit significantly from the Levelling Up Fund, with projects focused on delivering jobs, promoting growth and levelling up communities. And in Denbighshire and Wrexham, including my right honourable friend's constituency of Clwyd South, communities will benefit from over 16.4 million in UK government investment through round 1 of the Levelling Up Fund and the Community Renewal Fund.
Simon Baines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How would the Minister assess the long-term economic, social and cultural impact and benefits arising from the Levelling Up Fund in Wales, particularly our Clwyd South bid, which he has mentioned, which will send a great deal of investment that is badly needed into the World Heritage Site at the Trevor Basin, projects in Llangollen and Chirk, and the steam railway and community in and around Corwen?
Mr. Speaker, the successful Levelling Up Fund bid at the Pont Cysylltu Aqueduct and the Canal World Heritage Centre will obviously maximise tourism in the area and provide significant long-term economic benefits to his constituency. However, it is just one small part of a much larger programme that includes the £121 million Levelling Up Funds, £46 million Community Renewal Funds, £2.5 billion extra money in block grant, a record block grant for the Welsh Labour Government, showing that this government is committed to strengthening the union, supporting Wales and ensuring that jobs and prosperity flow to all parts of the United Kingdom.
Chris Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. One of the problems that we have in the Rhondda is that we have a large number of former disused coal tips, one of which, as the Minister knows, last year slid down into the river. It cost us £14 million to rectify that. We've got another 5 similar tips in the Rhondda. Can we please have some more money to make sure that we don't have another Aberfan disaster?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman will be aware, as I said earlier on, that this is a devolved matter, but he'll also be aware that over £2.5 billion of extra money has been provided to the Welsh Labour Government. Mr. Speaker, if there are dangerous coal tips in the honourable gentleman's constituency, then I would urge him to talk to his colleagues in Welsh Labour, ask them to provide the money and get the problem resolved as quickly as possible.
So Lane Saxby.
Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I outlined my previous answer. I'm hoping to meet the First Minister later this week to discuss a range of issues. I'm sure the Honourable Lady would agree that the M4 is central to cross-border connectivity, and improvements are well overdue if we are serious about levelling up.
Lynn Saxby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can see South Wales from my North Devon constituency, and I'm very keen to secure a ferry crossing from Ilfracombe to South Wales, popular on both sides of the Bristol Channel, with visions ranging from a Dylan Thomas literary tour through to a Barry booze cruise. Will the Minister meet with me to see how to progress this project?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy. It used to be a ferry from Tenby to North Devon back in the old days, and I'm very happy to see it. I'm very happy to see it reduced. I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that until Welsh Government honours its 2016 manifesto commitment to improve the M4, the quickest way of us visiting each other will be a 30-year-old ferry chugging across the Bristol Channel.
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I would like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation